Hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dean Cefola. I am a principal engineer in Microsoft in the Fast Track for Azure team. And our goal as a team is to help customers onboard to the cloud. And we kind of take all of that typical stuff that you do in consulting and make it really fast and easy. So we help people. We teach them how to do it. We don't do it for them. We don't do hands-on keyboard and that kind of thing. We guide customers towards best practices that Microsoft has established, and then by that, help everyone to onboard the cloud to whatever workload they want. I primarily, at this point in time, lead the Windows Virtual Desktop stuff around the globe for Fast Track, and we have a whole lot of engineers who go and deliver WVD with our customers. I happen to be one of them as well. And just whatever it is that the customer needs to do, either it's greenfield or it's brownfield, and we just help them to go from where they are to where they want to be. So that's what I do for my day job. And then, as you can see on the screen share, I also run the Azure Academy, which I have had a couple people help me create videos, but primarily it's just little old me. And I do that in my evenings and spare time. So my work is also my hobby. So this is what I do for fun, which sounds kind of psychotic sometimes, but that's me. So on the Azure Academy, I have videos across a ton of stuff in the infrastructure and platform as a service space in Azure. So lots of stuff there. Everything is free. And everything is there to just help you and help anyone in the community who wants to learn more about the cloud. And one of the things that I've been focused on recently, of course, is the AZ-140 exam. And under the playlist section here, I've got this playlist for want to ace the AZ-140 WV exam, start here. And I have just finished the 19th video in that series, and I have one more to go, and then the series is done. So what does the series actually cover? So on the Microsoft Docs page, you'll find all the details around the AZ-140. And if you go down to the bottom here, the skills measured, this is a download sheet that you can pull down and see all of the different things that are covered in the exam and what sections they break down to. And I've tried to align the videos with each of the bullets in the section. That's why there's so many, to make the videos so that if you already know everything about setting up your infrastructure or your identity, you can go right to security or monitoring. So that's the purpose of having so many videos in a series. And I just finished the monitoring one. So the last one that I have is the probably biggest one, and that is the user experience. So we'll be getting into MEM and all of the support now for multi-session, which is very cool, universal print, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that'll be in like the next week or so. Now, additionally, what my team helped to write and develop is something called a What the Hack. Now, this is a general initiative across Microsoft, and hacks at Microsoft are challenge-based approaches to learning. And there was no kind of hack or anything like that that I could find anywhere for virtual desktop. So my team went and created it for you. So it takes the AZ-140 exam, and that's the specific focus here of the hack, is not only learn WVD, but with an eye towards being able to prep for and pass that exam. So on the hack page, if you scroll down here, we have the different challenges, and these correlate to the skills guide. And then you can go into a challenge, like, for example, design WVD architecture. And then it'll have the background information, what you need to know, and success criteria, and then some learning resources that will also include links to the videos as well as documentation and other things, all there to help all of you pass the exam. And of course, up until now, the exam has been in beta, and I took the exam when it was in beta. I don't know, maybe you did as well. When you took the exam in beta, whatever score you get, you probably don't know yet what it is either. Those will be announced when the exam goes out of beta into general availability, which I think is going to happen this month. I don't have an exact date, sorry. But whenever that goes public, it'll usually be about a week or so after that when the scores get released. So that's the general stuff that I had to present. And the reason why is I also like to keep things very conversational, and I've blabbed enough. So I want to hear any questions that you all have, and we can just talk and have an open discussion about WVD or Azure or the Azure Academy or anything you're interested in. And I do have some questions that people already submitted online, but I want to hear from anybody who's on the call first. So feel free to come off mute and let's have a chat.
Mine's not much of a question, but we happen to be rolling out Windows Virtual Desktop right as you were kind of starting this whole thing up, and it was absolutely perfect timing for us and has been incredibly helpful. So for anybody who hasn't seen those videos, they're honestly fantastic.
Cool, thank you. So while you're thinking up your questions, I'll put one out here that somebody asked online. Let's see, Sid asked, in WVD single sign-on, your users would be created in your Active Directory and synced to Azure AD, right? Yes, that's true. Does that mean you need an Exchange server? No, you don't need an Exchange server. To make WVD SSO work, you need Azure AD, Azure AD Connect, Active Directory, ADFS, and a certificate authority. You can't use Azure AD domain services, and the reason for that is you do not have any domain or enterprise admin rights in Azure AD domain services. It's a managed domain controller service, just so you could have legacy authentication in a modern auth world. So you don't have those rights, so you can't deploy a certificate authority, specifically an enterprise certificate authority that you need to make this particular feature work at this time. And I also had quite a bit of feedback on my video that came out this last Sunday about people saying, well, why has Microsoft kind of been leading me in the direction of not having those legacy type infrastructure like ADFS, and now they put out a feature like this. So this solution is not necessarily intended for all users and all audiences. There are specific use cases that do align perfectly with this scenario, especially where people do have those other mechanisms for authentication like ADFS, or if you need smart card authentication, which also recently came out. So this builds on that type of path. The the holy grail that people have been looking for a while and asking about constantly is full Azure AD join and no longer needing domain controllers. Obviously, we'll need a different SSO solution in that scenario that because we won't have the ability to have ADFS. So we'll see what happens there. I don't know what's going to happen, but that'll be interesting. Let's see. I'm curious, has anybody tried to build the WVD single sign-on?
No,
and I can't see the chat, by the way. So
that ADFS requirement definitely took me out of that loop.
yeah, understood. So when I was going through it, normally when I create a video, I get an idea and then I start scripting that idea, and then that takes me like a couple hours to figure out what I'm going to do and script it, and then do I have to learn anything to actually get that done? But in this case, I knew how to deploy each one of those pieces. To build the solution, get it tested and working properly actually took me like 4 days. So if you run into trouble with it, don't feel bad. You know, half the fun of these kind of videos is I went through all the stress and the pain and the suffering to make it look easy. So that's kind of why I make these videos in the first place, is to take any kind of scenarios that I run to that are either interesting or complex and show here's how I did it A to Z, so that your lives can be a little bit easier. So hopefully that's a help to somebody who actually wants to go and deploy that. I know the folks in the more secure areas and government spaces and all that, they're going to use that solution a lot.
All right, I see a question in the chat. get the pop-ups out of the way.
Okay.
Not sure. Oh, okay. So Andrew is not sure if you covered this already, because Andrew joined a little bit late. It's okay, Andrew. Is there a proof of concept guide to follow to give to an end client IT team? Following the videos is okay, though a reference point or guide to cross-check against would be good. I are a time scale, checklist, prerequisites, etc.
So for something like that, and you can tell me, Andrew, if this is what you're thinking, but in the WVD docs, and this is something else that my team does at Microsoft. So as I said, we work with customers to help them onboard to Azure, but our key driver in working with customers is feedback. We want to make Azure better. And we want to know everything from, I don't like this button being over here, or change the color of this, or give me this new feature that you don't currently support. So whatever it is that makes the platform better is what we're interested in. One of those things also happens to be the documentation and making the docs better. So our team has worked with the product group quite a lot to make the docs as hopefully as usable as possible. There is a whole tutorial section here for the build out of WVD. That's a kind of step-by-step walkthrough. And we also have on the main page of what is WVD, all of the requirements that are here, from the licensing to all of the relying services that WVD needs across Azure to get it working, imaging, client information. I mean, all of that should be pretty much right here. There are other docs that are out there across Microsoft that also have other good collections of information. And let me show you where to find some of that. So under the Architecture Center, reference architectures, and then here under categories, you can just type in desktop. And this is a doc that I was part of a group of folks who wrote. And this is WVD for the enterprise. So this is meant to be, if you did WVD at its biggest scale, what would it take to do, and what are the things you need to watch out for? And even though that's the purpose of the doc, it is written with all of those best practices and things that you need to be successful. So it's still worth a good read, even if you have just a small implementation of WVD. And goes through all the different components, requirements, API limits, different kinds of servicing options. So lots of great stuff. However, this doc, as most things in the Architecture Center, you were limited. We're limited to making it pretty much a one-pager, which means you can't really stuff everything in there. So some of the new documentation that has come out around the Enterprise Landing Zone Windows Virtual Desktop construction sets is also stuff that I've contributed to. And that stuff gives all of the same information that's here in the Architecture Center doc, but in a lot more detail, because we just had more room to play with. So we would not only talk about, you need identity, so Azure AD, Azure AD Connect, but going into much more about identity security, conditional access, MFA, all of that. So those docs are also worth a good read, which those are, let's see, I got a shortcut for it. Under the Cloud Adoption Framework documentation, and I can share this link. Let's see, LC. And these are the different sub documents that are a lot of great detail going into the things that you should be thinking about in each of those areas of WVD. And then in this case, the doc is also built on that enterprise scale landing zone, which is this whole big thing about how to set up your basic foundation and governance in the cloud. I wouldn't worry too much about that in particular, because as far as WVD goes, WVD is WVD. It doesn't change regardless of what stuff you have on the back there. If you're putting your connectivity back to on-prem in the same subscription or a different subscription, if you use virtual WAN and you don't, or how many management groups you have, none of that matters to WVD. So you can look at that for your reference. Great information, and especially the BCDR stuff, a lot of detail in here about all the different scenarios you can run into for WVD and how you should be thinking about them and approaching them. So hopefully, Andrew, that answered your question. I know it was a very long answer.
Dean, I think some of this kind of went where I was going when Dean asked that question, was almost like a flow chart, right? Like for somebody who's new to WVD of, hey, do you need region resiliency? Do you looking for personal versus pooled? Do you need to replicate across multiple regions, like as far as FS Logic profiles, right? And then walking them through, okay, cool. With all of that, you're going to need, pooled with cloud cache, with, so on and so forth, and almost kind of template out exactly what it is that they're deploying. That'd be kind of interesting. So it's almost like an exchange calculator for WVD in a way.
Yeah, that'd be yeah. Always looking for new ideas for how to make things more understandable and better. So that's sort of an interesting dilemma on the being on the inside. Is you see things through a specific lens and you don't think about all of those. Okay, so I wrote this doc and it makes perfect sense, but then you hand it to somebody else who has not even thought of the concept, and then they look at it and go, this doesn't make sense at all. So It's always good to have that other set of eyes.
Well, I think the challenge is that you run down an avenue as you look at, let's say we saw, a couple of videos and you run down one way and then you go, oh crap, I need region resiliency. Okay, no problem, I'll do that. And then it's like, oh crap, now I need cloud cache because if I fail over to region B, now I don't have profiles there. Okay, and then next thing you know, you've re-architected and redesigned your implementation. So it would be kind of great to have that walkthrough to say, okay, great, this all makes sense. This is what I'm going to do. Yeah,
and have that be kind of a set of questions that you could ask up front, and then based on those questions spit out the either documentation or the learning path that says here's the things that you need to accomplish what it is you wanted. That's a great idea.
Well, and then there's, I think, the other side of it too is I think a lot of people are still being new to Azure, is as they're going through these questions, what does it mean? What does this mean? Resiliency, what exactly, I mean, we all know what resilience is, but how does that function, not only in Azure, but specific to WVD, FS Logics, and the Cloud Cat? It's like, it's a huge cascade of questions and answers and everything else.
Yeah, like one of the other questions that I got online was from a guy named Wayne, and he said, what's your thought on availability sets versus availability zones for WVD? And then what happens if I use ZRS storage for my profiles? And yeah, it's the same kind of idea. Like, do you understand the concept of what an availability set is and its limitations, and then what availability sets are, and then how does that fit into zone-based storage? And yeah, it gets very complex very quick. So like, just to sum it up for anyone who doesn't know, availability sets basically allows you to take a workload like pooled host pools and separate them across different physical hardware in the cloud data centers. So that's great, but when you do, you are limited to a maximum of 200 VMs in an availability set. Now, for a lot of people, that's just fine. But if you're doing things at big scale, then 200 is a very hard number to deal with. So you can do things without availability sets. But if you do, now what's the consequences? You could end up with half your servers on the same physical hardware. So what happens then if that physical hardware has a problem? You lose half your servers. Well, that's bad. So how can you deal with things a little bit differently? Well, that's where availability zones can help. The thing is, when you go with availability zones, if you don't use zonal storage in the same zone, now your storage could be 100 miles away from where your VMs are, and now you've got latency issues. So it's understanding how does the cloud work, and that's what makes WVD so awesome, and why I've spent so much time on it. Is really, you know, I don't want to this to come across the wrong way, but WVD by itself is pretty simple. I mean, it's, you know, it's just multiple users sitting on a virtual machine, and you get, you know, good secure connectivity to it. That's simple. All the stuff behind WVD is where it gets massively complex, because you have to know everything about identity security, identity governance, and networking, network security, firewalls, network security groups, routing, peering, hybrid connectivity. You know, then you have to go to security, and we got to secure the operating system, secure the session host, secure the host pool, secure the identity. And then before you know it, now you got to do all of everything in monitoring. So now you got to know the whole Azure monitor stack, and you got to know log analytics, and you got to know Security Center. And oh yeah, by the way, there's this thing called Intune or Microsoft Configuration Manager. Yeah, you got to know that now. So your head's going to explode with everything that you have to know to make WVD super easy. And that's where all the complexity really comes in. So, you know, don't feel bad if you're still ramping up in WVD or in Azure in general. There is an infinite thing to learn, and it never stops.
And it's constantly changing, so that
Yeah.
that helps the situation a lot right there. But I think a lot, I think if we look back at EUC server-based computing, and we had those same issues growing up. Oh, I've got Citrix MetaFrame. I'm just going to throw my apps on here and deliver it. And then all of a sudden, well, why is it not responding well? Oh, I got to know the networking. I got to, know the application, and it just expands. And so we're in that same space right now with WVD and some of these cloud architectures that are out there, because it is all new. And as things become more integrated, as you talked about with the monitoring and availability sets and understanding what that means and all that, we're kind of back to learning step one all over again.
Yeah, I posted something in the chat window. When people were designing on premises, they understood, oh, I need to put things geographically close to my users, because the infrastructure is a physical space. And now what I'm seeing, and I'm sure others are running into, is people assume if I put it in the cloud, it's all good. Deploying to the cloud is not a cure-all for bad design. There's still, like Dean said, there's still physics. If I build on my host pools with all my resources in the US and I want people from India to access it, there's going to be latency. There's going to be issues. So as you start thinking about these designs, you need to basically put that into effect too. Is what does the geography look like? Make sure that apps have access to the data in a non-latent type system. So those are things to keep in mind too.
Whoops, sorry. There is a lot of misperception about cloud. I mean, I think availability sets is just a great example of that. It's how many people actually think, oh, I've got all these servers, they're going to end up on the same physical hardware? What? That's not cloud. That's not the way it's supposed to work. Yet it does. So, it's those understanding, we all have a conception of what cloud is supposed to be. The reality, as they say, it's just someone else's hardware you're running on top of, and these things happen.
Yep. So hopefully some of this is getting you all thinking about different stuff. Certainly come off mute and ask a question or post a question in the chat. I've got a few more if we don't have any other burning questions at the moment.
There is one in the chat. Just gotta get rid of the pop-up. Is there by chance a doc or online post or Azure files versus Azure NetApp files dedicated to WVD? And we're interested in figuring out which profile storage solution to keep.
It's an interesting one. So for NetApp, Azure NetApp files, just for clarity here, this is, if you're familiar with NetApp on-prem, that's exactly what it is, but it's hosted as a cloud service. It is a first-party service. It's not run by NetApp. It's run by Microsoft directly in Azure by Azure folks who are NetApp certified. And of course, the NetApp product team works with them to make sure everything's exactly as it should be. But it's a first-party cloud service, just like Azure Files. The simple way to look at it, that I tell customers, is it's about raw IOPS. And of course, you can get more complex and think about chunks and things like that. But simply, it's raw IOPS difference. So Azure Standard Files has a default IOPS performance limit of 1,000 IOPS. You can turn on a feature flag in Standard Files that's called large file shares that gives it up to 10,000 IOPS. You can additionally go with Azure Files Premium. Premium can have a maximum IOPS of 100,000 IOPS. NetApp does up to 400,000 IOPS. Now, NetApp is aimed specifically at enterprise class workloads or multiple enterprise workloads. So you could take, for example, SAP. SAP is perfect use case to use Azure Files. WBD by itself, if you had like 500 users, NetApp Files is massive overkill. It's too high price to make it worth the value for just those users. However, if you use it with other workloads, then it's absolutely worth the money. So if it's about scale and meeting those performance requirements, because one NetApp Files frame costs a lot more than premium files. So it's about understanding your use case and the cost balance and cost benefit ratio of that use case. So if you combine multiple performant, low latency requirement workloads, NetApp Files is great. If you just have, a small POC of Windows Virtual Desktop, stick with Azure Files. And then, of course, you still want to think about performance, because now getting back to our earlier conversation about high availability, premium files can do Azure Backup, so can standard files. NetApp Files doesn't have an external backup solution. It has snapshots in the storage frame, and you can also do what's called cross-region replication from one NetApp to another NetApp in another region. So that's kind of a disaster recovery solution as well, which is very cool. But it doesn't have a backup like Azure Backup, which is a whole separate backup storage stuff. So that's another thing to think about. The other thing with premium files that's a negative is premium files only exists in locally redundant storage or zone redundant storage. It does not replicate to other regions. So this is where you would combine premium files with something like Cloud Cache, and then let Cloud Cache do your DR work for you and replicate it to another storage frame in another region. And this is one of the beauties of Cloud Cache. You could have in production, you could have NetApp, and everything's high performant and great. But in DR, you don't have the same necessarily performant requirement in DR. Things just need to work so we can get back to the business running and then go back to normal. So you could go with NetApp in production, replicating to Azure Files in disaster recovery, and it's all taken care of by Cloud Cache. And that way your DR solution is less expensive to manage, because remember, DR is sitting there running, waiting for your stuff to fail, and hopefully you never have to use it. So that's an awful lot of money to have another NetApp sitting there doing nothing. So another thing to consider.
Dean, you touched on the lack of global resiliency with Azure Premium File Storage. So we're actually in that exact situation. Is what do we do there? Do we move to Cloud Cache, or do we kind of wait? Do you think that Azure Files Premium will have global resiliency in the future, near future?
I would love to say yes, but I have no idea if that's on their roadmap. It's not something that that I know of, whether it's there or not. I would hope that, all features in Azure would think about the global resiliency, but sometimes the focus of the product is, we want very high performance, and the zone redundant storage is, good enough to meet whatever requirements they were aiming at. That's just my guess. I have no real idea if that's the conversation that happened. But as far as going to Cloud Cache versus VHD locations, the biggest negative in Cloud Cache is because the client agent does so much more for you. It takes longer to log on and log off, and that's the biggest negative. So if you can deal with the extra 4 seconds, 5 seconds that it takes for a user to log on, Cloud Cache can be very worth it because it does so much for you. The other thing to consider with Cloud Cache is the space on your C drive. So if you've got 30 users connecting to a single host and you've got Cloud Cache, each one of them has a little space on the C drive that's holding all of their stuff until it's replicated out to the storage location. So do you have enough C drive space and performance for all of those users to simultaneously be writing to the C drive? So you may have to increase the space of your C drive, which now is something that costs more money. So that's a trade-off, and you need to think about that because that also affects your density numbers. So if you don't want to expand your C drive, you got to cut down on your density, which means you need more VMs, which also increase your costs. So you got to think about it that way too.
So then what are your thoughts on the premium SSD versus the standard SSD? Do you think the premium is needed in a production WVD environment?
So the general recommendation across Microsoft has been that production workloads should be using premium SSD. I will temper that by saying, yeah, maybe, because it depends on how many users and what's the IOP performance of that particular drive. Because managed disk now says that each disk has a guaranteed amount of performance. So I can predict based on the users and what they're writing to the disk, how many users can write to a P95 disk, which is 127 gigabytes, without running into performance issues. And of course, your monitoring will all help you to figure this out. So when I look at that, if I have like 20, 30 users on a single host, I will definitely start with the assumption of a premium disk. I can always go to a non-premium disk if I find that it's a big waste of money because I'm just not hitting the performance requirements. So monitoring there will help, and this is has always been the problem with VDI type environments, especially in the cloud, because on-prem we had the problem too. It's just we never cared. Was that what is the actual performance needs of the user? And your user is going to run applications. What apps do they need? What are the performance requirements of those apps? And what happens if the user uses them simultaneously? And then scale that up by X number of users on a single host. And on-prem, we didn't care because we bought the physical host, and it didn't matter if we used it or didn't use it or over-provision or under-provision. In the cloud, it matters because you're paying for it.
Yeah.
So all of those things now are the hard work that you have to do to build it right. And then that all comes down to what is the user doing? And that's really hard to quantify because so far I've done, I don't know, 182 WVD engagements with customers. Not one of them has been able to tell me when I asked the question in our kickoff meeting, what is the performance impact of one user in your environment? Nobody knows that because nobody's ever had to really think about it. And that's where, especially where the monitoring insight stuff is going to be helpful if you haven't set that up yet. That's actually my video that'll come out this Sunday for the AZ140. And the monitoring insights is ridiculously simple to set up. And then the amount of information that it gives you down to the host, the processes, the user impact on the system is great. And I'm sure that there are very awesome other third-party monitoring solutions. Like before we had the Insights portal, I used Cefola exclusively. It's amazing. The Insight stuff, since it's now there as native first-party service, that's what I lean towards. And then if you know of a better tool, I'd love to know, and I'd even love to do a video about it. So, if you have a suggestion for any new content, always, let me know. I always want to know. But hopefully, that's enough to start thinking about. I don't know that there's a quick and easy answer, but think about your user density, individual user performance and impact, and then the size of the C drive, and then also the performance of the VM SKU that you're on, because don't forget, the virtual machine SKU is also going to limit the amount of disk performance that you can get out of your system.
I think you're spinning into really where my brain went when the calculator idea came to my mind was density. We're a smaller organization, so we were about 90 users when we started, and my main purpose for WVD was to migrate off of Citrix, but we had to onboard 36 people last Monday. And for a 90 user organization, right, that's a pretty darn big chunk. But then we were trying to figure out, well, do I go extremely dense and build these big VMs and do that? But then the problem is that when I do that, my cost, because I'm so small, of running 24/7 on a massive VM may not be worth it. So finding that balance and that break even is kind of difficult for me. One, because I haven't had the time to really focus on it. But so I kind of went in between, and I forgot what I picked. I think I ended up going with I feel like it's like a 832 or something along those lines, right? And just kind of just setting up a bunch of that. And that way I only have to keep one running overnight, and I don't have a huge expense in the off hours. So another kind of difficult one. And then of course that spins right into a question that I posted on your video that thank you for responding to was, hey, how do we automatically scale up and scale down? And obviously today it's scripting, and we can only hope and pray for the future soon to automatically shut those VMs down. And of course, as you create new images, right? Hey, I updated it. Now go and update all the ones that I have. That process is really broken.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and this is kind of an interesting dilemma, that the product team deals with. Is there's so many great features that other products have, and then you look at that and go, okay, well, so we know that we need something similar. So if we build the same thing, how much of that is us quote unquote ripping off of somebody else, and is that okay or is that not okay? And so that's an interesting problem to think about. And then you get other third-party management tools like Nerdio, who do a very cool job at doing that. But if you look under the covers at what they're doing, it's the same kind of thing. It's a whole lot of PowerShell scripting and functions running on top of Azure Automation, which is still great. I mean, it's a very good solution. And then, you say, well, why doesn't the product do this natively? I mean, if it's that easy and somebody else can write it, why can't they write it? Well, yeah, they can, but to ship is to make decisions, and you choose about what's the most critical thing, what's important. And the product team, I think, in my own opinion, is that they're worried about, we're more busy trying to solve for scale. Like right now, yes, the updating of the hosts and making it convenient to say, use Azure Image Builder to create a new updated version of my host and then roll over my entire fleet with the click of a button. I think that'd be great, and that's hopefully something that's coming. But for them, doing things like enabling the entire Middle East to be able to use WVD by setting up the WVD services and gateways in the UAE is more important, because now that's going to solve for bringing another 500,000 people online. So there's that tension that's always there for the product team, so don't discount any of the feedback about, this is a feature gap, we need to solve for this. That is still a message that they want to hear and they need to hear, because otherwise they don't know what that next big thing to tackle is to make the product better for all of you. So using the WVD tech community and giving your feedback or posting something as a comment on my videos, I share all of those feedback comments with the product team to help them know what direction everybody wants the product to go. Because it doesn't do them any good if they design, some little feature and service that then nobody uses. So, they need to know what it is that you all want to make the product better. And so, don't be afraid to say your comments and feedback, even if it is, you'd like, I had somebody do this with the ADFS feature. Great, you made this thing that I can't use. Thanks a lot. That's something that the product team needs to hear. So don't be afraid to share your comments, whatever they are.
I think that's the biggest weakness to WVD, and I absolutely love it, right? But coming from Citrix or looking at VMware, where you don't have to deal with creating scripts and automations to do that, I think this is the biggest roadblock to getting people into Windows Virtual Desktop. I think it's a fantastic product, but stupid stuff like this is really a big management problem, right? And if you don't have, whether it's the expertise or the time to script all of that, then that's where you get stuck. And really, Microsoft might go, hey, I don't really care. That's small business. I'm going after the big fish, and we'll get back to that later. But that may be kind of back to your point of, hey, who do we decide to go to?
Now, I know Thomas and I have had this discussion in the past. In everything I've gotten from Microsoft has always been WVD is a platform. It is not necessarily meant for direct use by enterprise customers. It can, obviously, but you're going to put the work into it. Again, this is my outside understanding that the Nerdios, the Cloud NetApp, Cloud Jumpers, those types of people, those are the ones that are developing the competing products against the Citrixes and the VMwares, because they can come in and take all of this existing infrastructure. To use Nerdio as an example, because that's the one I know best. I mean, it makes all that stuff that you're talking about, from the scripting and all that. Yes, that's what's going on behind the scenes, but those are things I don't have to worry about at that point. Managing with a Nerdio or someone else is very simple, easy, and direct, versus trying to manage everything natively. Because in the end, WVD is PaaS. It is not DaaS. And if that makes sense, it's not being built from a management interface standpoint to make life easier to move away from Citrix. It's giving other people the ability to compete with Citrix or VMware. And I know they don't come out and say that, and I'm not saying they are saying that. But from my outside opinion, if I can get 80 to 90% of the features out of WVD by buying Nerdio or someone else, I'm going to save a ton of money moving away from Citrix.
Well, and let's keep in mind, and let's be frank about the current state of the union of WVD. It's only been out for about a year and a half. As Dean said, the product team focus has been on scalability, reliability, and globalization of the product. So a lot of focus has been on, can we support 5,000 VMs, 10,000 VMs, 50,000 VMs? What does that look like? Do we have support in all the right regions? So while these additional kind of end-to-end features, and what I mean by end-to-end are the monitoring feature, the auto scaling, the automated functionality of deploying and creating host pools and virtual images and things of that nature. The product team understands all of that's important and knows for a complete end-to-end solution that will need to be there. And the North Star is that. But at this point, I always like to tell customers as I'm working with them, right now, WVD is the great framework of a truck. But if you want an ambulance, you need to do a couple of things. One, you need to either go third party and build your ambulance around the framework of your truck, or you need to have the internal knowledge set to be able to deploy and create those solutions for you. And I have customers that do both. I have customers that one will use third-party stuff and just take that off the shelf, and I have other customers that basically build all that stuff in-house. Like I said, the North Star is to have all this included, but the focus right now is scalability and reliability.
And I think something to add to that too is because WVD, is a platform, this allows those customers that want to create their own interfaces, they have full capabilities of creating, this is what I want. They can now create that. And they can continue to manage the way, not continue, but they can manage now the way they want to, the way their processes and everything works. So the idea of it as a platform goes beyond even just third party. It's those enterprises that take it on now have more flexibility in managing that environment than they ever did with other products.
Yeah, that's definitely very true. I've always worked for smaller organizations, so we don't get the flexibility and the power that comes with being able to script that, on your own, which would be absolutely incredible. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and a good example is Marcel's WVD admin. I can't remember his last name, Marceau, I think it is. But that product is a great example of, he just went out and built an interface, and it's a good example of what can be done.
For anybody in a similar situation to myself, when they are looking for a kind of an auto scale, and by that I mean, a start, shutdown script, I'll post a link in the chat, but I found a video on YouTube as well of a gentleman who posted an Azure function that runs every 5 minutes and goes through it, and that's been phenomenal. So I'll throw that in there for anybody looking for it. The one thing we don't have is, hey, I have a new image, now go replace all my session hosts.
And all these different third-party providers, and even when a custom solution is created, just kind of goes to show that one size doesn't fit all. Sometimes customers see a native solution and say, this isn't quite the right direction for us. We want something a little bit different. And then, like we said, that's where like Nerdio or CloudJumper or those other solutions come in. It's about the ability to kind of customize a solution to best fit your needs.
And remember, we have a lot of options with DevOps too. So for the folks that have DevOps teams on, in their skill set, they can use, things like Terraform or other tools to push out and deploy. And some of the stuff, so it's another option, right?
Just curious for everyone who's on the phone, how do you feel about your own automation skills? And automation could be whatever it is that you want to classify it as, just regular scripting, PowerShell, Terraform, ARM templates, anything. What do you think about your own automation skills?
I know from a personal standpoint, mine needs work. I will fully admit that.
Very weak. It took me quite some time to even figure out how to deploy ARM templates and whatnot. And looking back, it's really not that difficult, but I was just completely lost, if we're being honest.
Yeah, so the reason why I ask is all of these things that we've talked about with the cloud or in creating solutions that fit your own needs and those kind of things. This is what makes the cloud really shine. This is what makes it possible for one person to run an enterprise. It's the ability to scale yourself. I just did a short video on this over here, this 2-minute tutorial, which is part of a new series that I'm starting. The key idea is to work smarter, not harder. And as an admin, this is something that I picked up from Jeffrey Snover, who's the inventor of PowerShell, from a session I watched from him years ago that said that what separates people in IT departments is how they add value. And as a point and click admin, I can click through that GUI like nobody's business. That's great. But the guy who can script his way through it can get 1,000 times more things done at the same time. And that always was something to me, like looking, how do I make what I do have more impact? I can create a whole lot of scripts and then not only use them myself, but I can then share them with other people. And so, I do that, and that's what my all my stuff on my GitHub is all public, and feel free to go use it for however it helps you. And those kind of things then are things that I spent time to figure out and write. That's up there and shared, and then now used by hundreds of other customers in their environment, and who knows where they've shared it since then. And not all that to build your own little kingdom, but to say that the work that you have learned and invested in yourself can be used to help your company, your enterprise, other people who you don't even know, as well as help your own career. And the cloud really starts to shine when you know how to script and automate and scale what you can do, because now you can take on the work that 10 other people could do by pointing and clicking. So understanding how the underlying code can work, or the code interfaces, APIs, PowerShell, Azure CLI, ARM templates, Terraform, and we can obviously go on with other stuff. All of that stuff is what's going to help you to really scale what you're doing. So to build an entire WVD solution through pointing and clicking will take you probably half a day or a day to build the entire thing. But if you script it, you start the script, you walk away and you go do something else and be productive while the script is doing all the heavy lifting for you. So if you're not focusing on your automation skills, I think that you're doing yourself a disservice in the long term.
Totally agree. So I have always been an infrastructure person, and the last couple of years I've been diving into, I've been trying to stay away from it as long as possible and just do the things that, I needed to know. I know enough to get by. I know enough PowerShell, like Thomas said, a kitty, and enough to understand, and do what I needed to accomplish, but not really diving into it. And like you said, Andrew, there's not enough hours in the day to learn something new, right? So I started learning Terraform, and I do have my GitHub out there for anybody who wants to deploy WVD. And it was something like 20 minutes. Right, to do so, and I even added a domain controller in there too, because I needed to build a domain controller because I was doing it all in the cloud and I had no on-premises. So it's very worthwhile to start investigating and taking the time to learn some of that stuff, because it really is a valuable skill. And we do have some questions, so I'm going to catch up in the chat real quick.
Sure.
Yeah. So a question related to FSLogix profile. I've got the FSLogix profile using copy-profile. It works fine with desktop host pools. Now I need FSLogix profiles for remote app host pools. Please advise, can I get it by editing, trimming the existing FSLogix profile? If yes, how to do it? Or should I get the FSLogix file for remote app directly from local user profile? If yes, how?
Okay, so there's a lot there.
Yeah.
The first thing that I'll say as a general guidance is that generally speaking, one host pool to one FSLogix file share is the general way that it's recommended to be used. Now, right away, I can hear some people thinking, but wait a second, I'm one user. Why wouldn't I want my profile to be on my desktop host pool and then on my remote app host pool where I've got other workloads, because I'm still the same user. I need the access to the same files. And that's certainly a valid way to think about it. But when, and it will work, by the way, so though it's not that it can't. The thing is, though, that there's a lot of other things you have to think about when you decide to go down that path. With FSLogix, now you've got to make a decision. Do I want to allow someone to simultaneously log onto their desktop and a remote app? Because if you do, that's setting up concurrent connections. And to do that requires other configuration that you have to think about. And then how do you do that? Because there's different methods of setting up concurrent connections, and there's ways to set up read-write disks versus read-only disks. And so all of that then becomes other questions you got to think through and solve. So the simplest implementation that's generally good for everybody says one profile for each host pool. The second thing that I'll have you think about is, why do you need a profile in remote apps? And the general thing that I say to people when they think about doing profiles for remote apps is the application has to have some kind of state or some kind of files that it stores inside the local user profile that's configuration data or settings data that isn't or can't be stored somewhere else. And when you have those kind of things, then yes, it can make sense to have profiles for those remote apps. So you have to answer the question of, is that what your apps require? And if so, is it really that important? A good example of this is doing Chrome or Edge as a remote app. Yes, you can have individual user configuration and you can have users with their own extensions and things like that, but do you really want to support that as an admin? Typically, I find the answer is no. The user can just suck it up and deal with the browser that we give them. But there are other use cases like VS Code where the user must have their own set of application settings and configuration. So you've got to know your application to know where it stores its data, to know if this is a hard requirement or just a user preference. If it is, answer the question about concurrency. And if they should be concurrent, you've got to set up all that configuration in your profiles and in your storage. And then when the user goes to log on, they also have to finally understand whichever one they log on to first will have one experience, and where they log on to second will have a different experience. Specifically, if you're using read-only concurrent disks. So read-only obviously means the user can't make any changes. So if they log on to their desktop first and then their remote app of VS Code second, when they log on to that VS Code session, they won't be able to make settings in their configuration because it's read-only. And that's usually not the experience people want. So now it has to be read-write or keep them separate. And if they're really separate, is that really a problem? I mean, the user, do they really need their documents and their desktop icons in a remote app profile? No, but they may need OneDrive. So all different kinds of things to consider in going there. So there isn't a hard and fast. It really depends on your apps to start with. And then what experience are you wanting to give your users, and what do they understand that you're giving them? So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Dean.
So I had a question online where Carlos asked, a coworker told me WVD is only accessible from the internet, but now I realize I can use a VPN or ExpressRoute. Which one is correct? So that's relatively complex because there's two different sides of WVD. So there's two logins, as we all are very painfully aware. And the first login is to Azure Active Directory. So that requires connectivity over the internet. The second login is the login on the virtual machine, which is your Active Directory or Azure AD Domain Services login. And that one is a private connection, but the flow still goes over the internet through the gateway service, except if you use RDP short path, which then will send that second connection traffic privately over your VPN or ExpressRoute. So you still need the upfront ability to talk to the cloud. On the session host side, the clients still need to be able to talk to the internet. Otherwise, they can't authenticate through Azure AD to start with. So there isn't a, normally speaking, a direct way to flow 100% of the connection traffic through your private on-prem. Because even if you start at the very beginning of the process and you say, I've got my client, and my client is sitting, in a corporate office or in a coffee shop, and the client goes to subscribe, the very first thing that happens when they click subscribe is they have to put in their credentials, which then means that there is a home realm discovery, which happens through Azure AD. Azure AD says, okay, well, your domain is registered over here, which either does or does not have ADFS or Okta or somebody else. And then that sends the authentication either to Azure and it responds with a token, or to your federation service who responds with a token. Then you have to click the icon. And that's where RDP short path comes in. Now, there has been publicly announced that RDP short path is being on the roadmap for over the internet communication. So that's not out yet. Don't know when that'll be out. We'll see what that looks like and how it changes the connection flow. But I seriously doubt that it's going to replace the Azure AD authentication side of that equation. But who knows? We'll see. Are there any other? Yep, go ahead.
I have a related question, but it's actually more of an Intune question for anybody who's dealt with it. But so we tried to deploy the Windows Store app for remote desktops, but my understanding is the Teams optimization is not necessarily built into that. So then we said, all right, we'll pull that off, and we then went with the full Windows client. Well, the Windows client obviously would require admin rights to do updates to the install itself when the new versions come. So we got the new version, and then I tried to push the new on top of somebody who already had the old version, and I'm not seeing success in getting those prompts to go away to update. Has anybody successfully rolled that out, or is there anything I'm missing?
Did you set the registry keys to allow for automatic updating?
Set the registry keys to allow for automatic. That's a good question. Because if they didn't, then obviously you wouldn't get a prompt is where you're heading. So yes, I tried to use a PowerShell script to do that in Intune, and something's failing there. So I've got to look at that script and find out what it is. But then throwing the new version on top of the old, I expected to just take care of it. And I'm not seeing success there. And maybe it's something I'm doing wrong. I don't know if anybody else has successfully done it.
So Neil, this actually kind of segues into a different conversation of how you're treating your virtual desktops. Are you treating your virtual desktops like cattle or like pets? And what I mean by that is, for a pet virtual desktop, it's a desktop that you nurture, that you work on updates, and that you care for over time. And one of the kind of dependencies there is, do you have some type of automated image creation or DevOps system to streamline your image creation? For enterprises or larger companies, they tend to treat their virtual desktops like cattle. And instead of trying to troubleshoot anything like that, instead of trying to update individual desktops, they just roll new desktops out. They kill the old desktops and then they roll new desktops out. So there's kind of one thing to think about there is, how do you want to go about that process? One, do you want to nurture your existing virtual desktops, or is it a better option to, on a cadence, whatever works for you, once a month, twice a month, once a quarter, to build an updated desktop with those new updates and then roll that out?
And I think what I'm referring to, Thomas, is, and to answer your question, it is more pet-like than cattle-like right now, because of the fact that we do manually go in and kind of update those. But you're right, that cadence is significantly more delayed. It might be 2 weeks, a month, whatever it is. But my question is actually for the, like, let's say I deploy computers to end users, and I'm installing the remote desktops app on there so that they can connect into Windows Virtual Desktop. So because of that, I've got to get that updated for security functionality reasons so that they do have that. So that's where the original question came from.
Oh, you're talking the end client, not the virtual machine.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm having a hard time. Like, it's already installed, and then I try to lay the new version on top via Intune, and it's not doing what I expect. So again, not necessarily WVD related, just was wondering if I was the only one running into it.
I'm just curious if, when you set up your app deployment, and specifically the the info side of that app deployment that tells the system that the app has been properly installed. Are you doing that with the MSI ID, or are you doing that with a different method?
I think it is the ID, and then not knowing enough about this, right? Would the MSI ID for a previous version and new version be the same, and therefore it's conflicting?
They shouldn't be the same.
Okay.
At least as far as I know, they shouldn't be the same. I've never actually looked at it though. Now that I think
Yeah,
about
I'll
it.
take that.
I'm curious, has anybody used Universal Print yet?
I tried. And it's
Right.
expensive.
Oh, you're one step ahead of me. I haven't tried yet.
I can't get past how much it is for 500 prints, and then when you actually roll that out for real, it seems like that could get really expensive. And the comment I always get is, well, people don't print anymore. I work for a bank. They print a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't actually used Universal Print yet. I've used Thin Print's Easy for Azure, which is a very cool solution. I think it's sort of the similar concept to Universal Print, except of course, Universal Print's managed totally in Azure. And I'm just curious because I'm going to have to dig into it this week so I can make my next video. So I'll have to learn everything about it. And, this is the way things usually go. You get an idea, and then you got to learn everything about it and be able to speak intelligently about it in, a few days so that I can create a video that makes it look like I've been doing this for forever. So, there's some of the secret sauce,
I have used it, actually. I ended up, it did not support a special label printer.
Okay.
It's not supported, so ended up having to go to Easy. But yeah, it works.
Was it because the printer type didn't support whatever the HTML requirement is? I think it is. I think it's an HTML requirement.
Yeah, and it says in the docs it's not supported. So it was just a try to see if we'd get lucky.
Well, I'd say that's feedback for the product team. Get that thing working.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I had another question here. This is from someone named Aaron, who asked, is there a method for rolling your latest image back in the shared image gallery to a previous version if you find you have problems? So I want to say yes and no. Yes, because there's a way to do it, and I can tell you, but there's no direct button to push that just rolls back to latest version or previous version. The way that I would think to do it, and this is just me thinking about it, is I could go into the gallery, take my latest version and delete it, and then my previous version becomes my new latest version, which then I can deploy and then deploy and re-update and reseal and then put back in the gallery as a new latest version. But wondering if anybody else has a thought about that.
Does Nerdio do that? I guess I wouldn't think so.
If you had a problem with your latest version, I don't know that that's, I know Nerdio does the automatic servicing of the image based on a separate VM that they have sitting in the background. But I don't know if you came up with a bad image, if then Nerdio does an automatic rollback with the click of a button. I don't know. Maybe they do. I don't know. Has anybody well, I guess this is the first question, is anybody using shared image gallery to manage their images?
I am.
Or an even better question, has anybody tried using the Azure Image Builder yet?
I have.
Okay. And what's been your experience so far?
I like it. It works pretty well. The question becomes how are you going to manage and deliver those applications? If you have tools in place like SCCM or something like that, maybe that's a better way to do it. But the nice thing about image builders, if you can get all the applications to install as part of that base image, you can do a pretty fast rollout of new or additional session hosts.
Yeah, the app integration, the customization phase of Image Builder is cool if you already have your apps already scripted.
Right.
Yeah, but if you don't, then there's a bunch of work there to get that done. Or, so good question. And this is one of the things about Azure that can sometimes rub me the wrong way is you have 1,000 ways to do something, and which one is right for me? Like for example, we have in another area we have update management, right? So Azure Update Management is an Azure Automation based thing that, believe it or not, officially does not support Windows Client. So it's only for Windows Server officially. Now, I've heard some people say that they've gotten it to work for Windows 10. Even if you did, it's not supported. So, and the reason why is because there's a whole other product team with a stack that says, you should be using Intune or Configuration Manager to manage your client operating systems. So they didn't support it in that way because they thought other people should be going a different way with their tooling. So why do we have to have two tools that do the same thing? There's different people, different admins who use those things. Like we have Azure Security Center, and that's great. But then we have this other thing, which is the Azure Defender Security Center. So why two product stacks that do the same job? And it's because different admins manage those things. So my question back to the enterprise world is, why do we have to have two separate admins? Isn't protecting from viruses the same on servers or clients? Something to think about. These things evolve over time, but the part of the move to the cloud should not be done as a idea of, well, it's just another traditional data center. This one just happens to be managed over in Azure instead of on Rackspace. That's not how you should be approaching the cloud. The cloud is, yes, it is technically a different data center with a bunch of racks and servers, and you can think of it like a traditional data center, but you really shouldn't, because you should change all of those technical debt legacy ways that you've been doing things for the last 30 years into a modern way of managing your environment, stressing things like cloud first thinking, DevOps, and not just in the DevOps tools. That's half of DevOps. The other half is the principles of DevOps. Like Thomas said, treating your systems like cattle instead of like pets. Things in the cloud should be fast and disposable. The very idea of DevOps is to fail quickly, find out what went wrong, and then change it quickly, instead of having, like we've had for forever in the industry, System Center. System Center was a build the product once and it'll live for and who knows how long period of time, and we'll update it, occasionally. Well, that was great in the 80s and the 90s, but now things need to move fast because business moves fast and IT needs to keep up. So that's the purpose behind the cloud, is to be able to move fast without any of that procurement and how do we expense this $10,000 server over the next 5 years. Is the cloud. Spin up your VM. Oh no, it's the wrong one. I built it wrong. I don't like the size. Throw it away and spin up another one. It's meant to go fast. So don't think of it in the same terms of legacy thinking. Think of automation, innovation. How can we improve this workflow? I was never happy with being the guy who just did what the boss said. I wanted to take what the boss wanted and then make it better. So that's how I add value, and say that we either improve the process, or we improve the tooling, or we cut down on errors that happen in the environment because we remove the human element of having to point and click. We automate, all those kind of things increase your value as an admin to your own company and to wherever else you're going in the future. So always think, how can I take this thing and make it better? Work smarter, not harder.
So someone, Joseph said that he would use the shared image gallery exactly the same way that you suggested, Dean, with deleting the new version and rolling back the host pool to the old version. And we have some links into Nerdio that supports the image.
Cool.
Someone asked, quick question, not sure if anyone asked this, but are there optimizations for Win10 MS Build 20H2? Oh, I think Thomas posted the link into the chat. Yeah.
It's not specific to 20H2, but it's just the general optimizations. And another, and this goes to Dean, you know, there's many ways to perform an action. Another way to kind of perform a rollback action per se is to use Group A and Group B machine groups in your host pool. So I have machine group A that's running, that everything's going well. When I want to update or create new, I create it in a group B in the same host pool, bring those up. I can spin group A down once I've tested and know group B work. Then I can run group B. If there's any issues, I can immediately spin group A back up. I can spin group B back down and kind of go that way. And then once group B is a known good set of systems, then I can delete group A and just run on group B until the next time it's time to update. Then I update a group A and do the same thing with group B. So again, there's many ways to perform and mitigate those actions. You just need to figure out what works best for your environment.
Yeah, while you were saying that, that got me thinking about validation pools. So is validation pools something that anybody is doing? And I mean that beyond just needing to turn on the validation flag because there's some new feature that you want to try. But like, are you actively using validation pools?
I am. I tried to get MSIX working as we were preparing for the large onboarding, and we kind of failed at it, and I couldn't figure out why. I was able to do it with an on-prem server as opposed to one hosted in a storage account, which is really silly. So obviously it's something stupid that I'm running into, but I ran out of time, switched gears, and we still are on validation pools.
Neil, just to back you up, you are not the first person that I've heard say, I can get it running on-prem just fine, but I can't get it working in Azure. So you're not alone there, buddy.
Yeah, it was really weird. And, you know, I followed, there's actually some like conflicting guidance. Like some people said you only needed like the read-only, I forget what it's called, but it's like the read-only storage contributor. And then if I'm not mistaken, Dean, your video said that you needed edit. And then I don't know where I got my information. Maybe I was off, but I feel like some people said read and some people said edit, but either way I was stuck.
Let's see if this is it. No. I don't know if anybody has the quick link to Stefan's MSIX troubleshooting guide. Trying to find that. This one. Yeah, I think this is the link. Yep. I'll post this in the chat. So this has been invaluable.
Thank you.
This is great for the entire workflow of MSIX app attach and getting it to work. And it also has plenty of error codes in it at the bottom here. There's your whole flow of how it should function and specific errors that you run into and what those errors actually mean. Like I don't know, you know, this is just funny. I sometimes I wonder like how do error codes get made and who decided that, you know, this particular code means one thing, and then the text that they give you, you know, how it sometimes is very unhelpful. And it's like, how did that happen? You know, who decided that this error code should have that text behind it? Let's see if I can find one example. But some of these are actually like super clear. Like you get this error message, MSIX manager must be run in elevated mode. Well, yeah, that's pretty clear. I like that. And then you get some of them seem to be misleading because of where the things happen in the flow. And so you get an error that says I can't I can't like authenticate or something. Yeah, here. I think it was this one, not available in your subscription. It was either that one or session hosts, and I don't know. I can't find it right now. But anyway, the point was that some of the messages that you get are because the host couldn't do what you asked it to do because you missed something else earlier in the process. And so it gives you an error message from earlier in the process, but it's not like what you expected the error message to be. So use the troubleshooting guide, look at the flow of how things are supposed to work so that you know when you look up an error code, is that like the actual code you have to deal with, or did you miss a prior step? So hopefully that helps.
Dean, in my first time joining, and even when I spoke to Jen previous to that, as I found her on LinkedIn and became acquainted with this group, was my dream is to have Adobe Standard run as MSIX. And unfortunately, I couldn't find anybody that had either attempted it or successfully done it. But that's what I have in my mind for MS App or MSIX App Attach, which is probably a bit ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, I know of some rather large apps that I've either packaged or helped package. And some of this is strange, like things that you would think would be really hard to do that are relatively easy. For example, like I've done AutoCAD and SolidWorks as app attach. I've done, or actually Stefan did a video on it too. He did, I think, Gears of War 5 as an app attach, which was like amazing. So there's the native tooling. And then there's some other third-party tools that are out there that really help when you run into problems. The biggest one I'll say is from Tim Music, which is PSF tooling, which you can find in the Microsoft Store. And that stuff is great for, according to his documentation, if you get your average success of making an MSIX file is like, let's say 60% out of the gate, no problems. It'll work 60% of the time, flawless. The other 40%, you've got some issue of some sort. With PSF tooling and the stuff that he's got in there, he's getting like 95% success rates every time. So that's something else to look at for Adobe Standard or anything else that anyone wants to do. The one that I have been asked is, why isn't Office packaged as an MSIX? And that's a great question, but I think we think of Office as, well, it's Word, Excel, PowerPoint is. Yeah, that's true, but Office as a whole is like 5 billion lines of code. And it is by no means small to attempt to package it. And I think that the Office team has been working on packaging it for like 3 years or something like that. So Office is a beast. So I don't know that we'll see it anytime soon, but if we do, I'll be pleasantly surprised. But in general, the shift towards MSIX is it's another thing to put on your checklist of things to do, because this goes beyond WVD into how Microsoft envisions all application packaging in the future, as well as application delivery. So right now, every app that you can download out of the Microsoft Store is a universal Windows app. These are all based on MSIX. And the installation and the deletion are much cleaner because they're all basically containers. So makes them easier to ship, easier to deliver, and put on multiple platforms. So if you're not thinking about MSIX and app attach in the WVD context, really should start thinking about it. It'll change how you do your images. It'll change how you do just general application delivery. So you could conceivably, and I've done some videos on this already, where I used stateless VMs. So this is using Azure Ephemeral Disk. And then there's the nice thing about this is there's no cost for storage on your VMs because the disk itself is provided as a service. So that's great. So what costs less? Deploying a image that either comes from the Azure Marketplace or one I create through Azure Image Builder that's always up to date with my configurations, that builds then my ephemeral session hosts, which are, again, stateless. So when you turn them off, they're actually deleted. So then I go and turn them on and scale up. I create new hosts every time. So every time I provision a host, it's updated, which then puts you on a whole different way of managing your environment. And then you combine that with app attach. So now I don't need apps in my image, means I need less image maintenance. So all of these things together, can really shift how you approach your VDI kind of environments. But this goes beyond that, because app attach as a technology is part of Windows. So it's not the magic of it that lets WVD work is Windows features in particular that are supported on, I think was it 1909 and newer, which then brings in the other idea around app attach, and that's SimFS. So if anyone hasn't heard of SimFS or used it yet, app attach today has been working by attaching virtual hard drives. The downside to attaching virtual hard drives is it takes a lot of CPU and RAM to attach a disk, and then performance overhead in keeping them attached and having all the users connect to them. SimFS does that same thing in a much lighter way. And the performance impact on a system attaching disks with VHD versus SimFS, you're getting like 80% less overhead with SimFS. So that means I can stack more applications on the same system or have more resources available for more users, so I can get better density. So more stuff to think about. So